The cover for us. Ma'am. So it's been a long journey and it's just a new beginning. So can we have a warm round of applause as we get the Finance Minister and Mr. Arun Puri, our Editor-in-Chief, to unveil the... Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Puri. Thank you. So, can we have a warm round of applause, please? Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Puri. Thank you. Now you're banging on this. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Hello and welcome to the grand finale of the India Today Budget Roundtable. We are delighted and privileged to be joined on this occasion by the Finance Minister of India, Nirmala Sitharaman ji, who's just delivered a budget which has been appreciated by the kind of people who usually you'd assume would find some critique with the budgets. The kind of sector-wise, industry-wise applause that she's got is quite rare. We have a lot to talk about. Ordinarily, we have, say, a corporate roundtable and you have industrialists coming, so we requested Nirmala Sitharaman ji to take questions from an editors roundtable. So we're very happy to have you over here. Let me introduce my colleagues who will be joining me in the moderation. I want to welcome Saurav Majumdar, the editor of Business Today magazine. We've got Siddharth Zarabi, the managing editor of Business Today Television. We've got our anchor Abha Bakhaya, senior editor at BTTV. And joining us from London live at this time is my colleague and Business Today's global business editor, Udayan Mukherjee. Hi Udayan, great to have you with us. So let's get started. Finance Minister, at the outset, I want to talk about your priorities. Because the one piece of criticism that has been flung the way of this budget is that you're looking out into the future by focusing on capital expenditure, which will have a multiplier in the years to come. But the opposition and some economists who lean towards a leftist point of view say the need is immediate, that you've got people who are drowning, they needed a life jacket, you are showing them the shore which will come in time from now. And therefore, when you should have been pumping up your revenue expenditure to provide succor to people now, you're choosing to look out into the future. By then, some of those people would have drowned economically. How do you respond to this? And welcome, ma'am. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, India Today, for having me over. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Well, I don't think they are right in saying I'm only looking in the future, looking into the future, but I'm actually providing a certain continuity from last year's budget. That, I think, is something which I'd like to reinforce because some critical policy prescriptions were made last year. Privatization, the policy for public enterprises, opening up all sectors for private participation, inclusive of space and atomic energy. All this runs from last year's. And also last year's budget was prepared even as we were seeing signs of revival, but as soon as it was presented, you had the second wave. But we didn't know of the second wave, but we wanted to have the economy come out of the first quarter of 2020, which really pulled us down. So that budget, with the prescription for what India should be like, a blueprint for the next decade or so, continues. And now, with the second wave, and also because of the Omicron, that budget which came with some prescriptions, we are reinforcing that formula that we adopted. And what is that formula? Which partly answers your second question. The formula is public investment in infrastructure building, and that is capital expenditure. It's very well established, and data proves that for every rupee that you spend in capital expenditure, the multiplier is about 2.995. Whereas if, as you suggest, go through the revenue route and give some money in people's hand, well, it has multiplier, but just see what it is, 0.95. These numbers can be questioned, but they can't be very different. Rather than, they will have to reflect this kind of a, levels of multiplier effect. So would it not be, therefore, right for me to continue with that which I started last year in investing in public infrastructure with public funds, and hope to have the private investments also come in, because gradually, globally, India's exports are doing well, Indian demands are doing well, therefore they can expand on capacities. With this, I aim to have public expenditure commencing and leading to a virtuous cycle of crowding in private investments as well. So serves both the purpose, and even better serves both the purpose.
Okay, we'll take some questions from Business Today's editors. I'll start with Saurabh Majumdar. Saurabh.
Madam Minister, you actually said, this is clearly the thesis of your budget, that you want to invest in expenditure, capital expenditure, hoping for private investments to then be crowding in. That's clearly the thesis of the budget, which everybody has understood, I would say. The question here is, now, when you do that, obviously it is not an immediate handout-based budget, which you mentioned clearly. You're setting the stage. You talked about, in the next 25 years, very eloquently in your speech. The question is, immediately, in the next couple of quarters, we might, thankfully, Omicron is on the wane, we are in control, etc. So maybe there is pent-up demand which will come back from the economy itself. Now, next 2 quarters, there is a view that pent-up demand will come back. There will be a lot of consumption. Do you anticipate maybe after the second quarter, next 2 quarters are over, do you anticipate private investment and your capital expenditure budget to work adequately, that we have a growth trigger in case that pent-up demand then starts receding?
Well, the fact that PLI was given for about 14 sectors, 13 initially and then one more added on, has had very positive outcomes. The response to the government's PLI scheme has been absolutely tangible there for you to see, which means investments are happening, one. And second, also triggered by that, and also from the point of view of being right, the corporate tax reduction which happened pre-pandemic, 2019 October, we had said that will apply to all new manufacturing capacities that are getting created till 2023 March. Now we can see this potential of expansion, new investments happening. So on that strength, we have extended it on the demand coming from industries which have actually started putting money, and they just want to be sure that they wouldn't miss that opportunity by not being able to have manufacturing commence, which is the condition. Manufacturing commence by 31st March 2023. So they've asked us to expand and extend, and we've extended the date. All these indicate to me that industry, private industry, is coming in with additional investments and also expansion in capacity. Again, for the way in which our exports are ramped up, that couldn't happen without capacities being brought in for meeting with the demand which is happening, going out, meaning expanding their exports. Now, whenever you expand exports, it's also because your production within the country is growing, and that means more jobs are happening. And therefore, I would want people to look at all these developments rather than cling on to one number which comes from somewhere and say, no, jobs are happening. There can be more jobs happening. I also will concede that. But jobs are happening.
So we'll take the next question from Udyan Mukherjee in London. Udyan?
Thanks, Rahul. Mrs. Sitharaman, your focus on capex is very welcome, and it's been welcomed by industry and the stock market. But just to understand those numbers better, of the 2 lakh crores of additional capex that you've laid out in the budget, 1 lakh crores or half of it is through the states which you are lending to. And we've seen in the past that even when outlays on capex are very large, execution actually is tardier than the outlays, and one doesn't achieve the kind of project execution that you set out to do. Do you fear that because of execution issues, particularly because this time execution is also equally dependent on states, you may not end up achieving the kind of multiplier effect that you're setting out to achieve?
No, that's a reasonable doubt to have, but matter of fact, I will say, during the Atmanirbhar announcements, we had first come up with this thought of giving states some money without charging them the interest. Even if it was a borrowed money, we wanted to extend it to them. That was not a big sum, 10,000 crores. It was very well received and states benefited from it, which made us give at the RE this time 15,000. Even that's gone down well, and states, in fact, when I had a consultation with chief ministers and finance ministers prior to preparing this budget, there was very clear desire that if we can do that, meaning fund them for building their infrastructure, they would be in a position to spend. They didn't indicate any amount, but we thought we found that an effective route, and we wanted to therefore share our resources with them, and that is why it is an interest-free 50-year 1 lakh crore being given to states. And I see a great enthusiasm among states. They're already coming up with ideas. So from 1st April, it would be one question for the ministry to do the EFCs and clear the projects. So I'm very hopeful this will get utilized. As regards central departments, last year, where we had given something like 5.54 lakh crores, we at the RE stage are able to say that even by 31st March, we would reach 5.51 lakh crores, just short of 0.03. Now, that is after quite a bit talking to the departments and asking them to meet up. I have had several reviews every quarter. The cabinet secretary was reviewing. Once the prime minister also spoke in the cabinet about it, saying that's the only formula through which we can revive the economy. If that was the case when, let us say, you had the second wave in April last year, and now with Omicron, you already reaching that 5.51 in this set of trying times, I'm sure the coming year, departments would be ready, and they've got the, let's say, the formulation with which they can execute it even in difficult times. This time, I'm sure to achieve that 6.5, which is going to the central departments, and that 1 which is going to the states. So I quite understand your little worry, but I'm with you, equally worried, but wanting to work because I can see the potential of it getting used.
Siddharth Zarabi.
Madam Minister, thank you very much for that point, and I just want to take it forward. One of the ways that the government proposes to finance the future spending plan for the next year is borrow a lot of money from the market, and you yourself must have noticed and gotten this question on the bond market reaction. My question is not just that, but would it be a fair assessment to say that perhaps you have outlined a very large borrowing target, however, with better small saving deposits, with perhaps the entire disinvestment proceeds coming in, non-tax revenue in form of dividends, you may not need to borrow as much?
Well, you fairly covered what I would have used for an answer. But also, I will add one more. The stock market, particularly the bond market's response post the budget, I didn't think was because of the budget. If I were to look at the bond market's performance prior to the budget, they had already become a bit jittery. They were going up and down. And that's nothing to do with the budget. Budget was read out on the 1st of February, and we are more looking at what happened immediately after the reading out of the budget. But things happened even before that in the bond market. And I would think they are more jittery about the US Fed and the decisions of various central banks after that. And that's natural and understandable. And it is less because of what I've said in the budget.
Abha Bakaya.
Ma'am, I'd like to ask you, and one of the hallmarks of this government has been its communication. You frequently had sessions with industry, you've always taken their feedback, and yet there are still some sections of industry that feel ignored. The domestic demand related ones, the services one, hospitality, which is a significant contributor to GDP. And while you did touch upon it in the budget this time around, there's a feeling that somehow the pain in the sector is not being addressed. They've been asking for infrastructure status for a long time. Is that a possibility? Is there a reason perhaps that you're looking at this differently? Because there seems to be some discrepancy with which how the industry is reacting.
I don't know where to start. With the hospitality industry, not just before this budget, but before the previous budget, earlier one, I've had consultations. Now, this budget, of course, I've given 50,000 crores as an addition to the already fairly well-running emergency credit liquidity guarantee scheme. This is also a sovereign guarantee funded 50,000 that we're given, and we expect the banks to. In fact, in one of my chambers, I think it was FICCI meeting yesterday, that again, very similar points of what you've said were raised by some of the members. I have invited them for a meeting which I will facilitate, but of course some of the matters which they've raised pertain to the RBI, but even then I said I would have a meeting with them, not just with FICCI, but hospitality from FICCI and other CII and ASSOCHAM and PhD Chamber of Commerce. They could all come, and a meeting can be organized with the banks is what I've told them. And we will also perhaps have a member from the RBI attend it, so that issues can be understood as explained threadbare by the hospitality industry themselves. And post that we can work out something. I would hopefully expect to have something sorted out there. But as it is, we have extended the ECLGS for them.
Madam Finance Minister, of all the decisions you took in this budget, the one that's generated the maximum amount of chatter is your announcement that you'll be taxing crypto assets at 30%.
Essentially coming from my last interview with you. It was, in fact, I had quoted it saying, somebody said it's not a middle class related. I said, how dare you say that? I was with another senior journalist who said in his office there are so many people who have all gotten into. Didn't you not say that? Yes.
Which
All
is
credits to you.
And if we are featuring in the budget, which is also why, Madam Finance Minister, you should do even more interviews with us and we can jointly decide policy making. But that being said, we were part of a Business Today Facebook launch this morning, and there were lots of people who were in the crypto space. And the one thing they were saying is that on the one side, you've got different kinds of coins, which are speculative, and you can argue that they're not rooted to anything backed by a central reserve, and therefore taxation on speculative activities is okay. But there's a whole different world out there of blockchain, of technologies which can fundamentally alter governance, architecture for administration. And they're saying we've now been lumped in the same category, and that is unfair. So my questions to you are the following. One, between whether the tax comes first or the law comes first, it's chicken and egg. Why did you choose what you chose?
No chicken and egg. I will tax first.
Okay. Secondly, how do you see this framework evolve? You spoke of digital currency this year. Are you serious about launching it this year? Because typically when a project is launched, you do a pilot run in some districts or on a small scale. the RBI hasn't rolled out, they've been working on different kind of papers, but they haven't rolled out a pilot project yet. Can we launch it within this 1 year? And if we do, what form and shape will India's digital currency take?
Well, that will largely depend on how RBI would want to handle it. It's not as if after I've said this in budget, they're going to start working. Obviously, any announcement pertaining to aspects which are under the RBI domain, the ministry talks with them, gets their inputs, and only then comes on board. It's not as of 1st February, it's going to be a shocker to them and they say, scramble, scramble, we'll have to work now. That doesn't happen. We've had consultations with them. About people feeling that I've, clubbed all of them together and how could I take a call like this? No call has been taken. The consultation is happening. We will have to hear everybody. And after that is when we are going to see how best what we have to do, we'll do. So by assuming that I've clubbed where I've not done anything yet, they are really wrong. I've not clubbed, nor have I eliminated the possibility of clubbing them. So all this depends on when I get the inputs from the consultation.
Do you follow what's happening in the crypto market? Does that interest you? Like at one level, from the back of your eye, you see what's happening in the stock market. Do you at all see what's happening and worry for what may happen, or do you track?
We have a team of people who are constantly consulting, watching, monitoring, listening to people from that area and also giving me a feedback and so on. We are in touch. We are seeing everything happen.
We'll get Udayan Mukherjee to take the next question. Udayan.
Mrs. Sitharaman, over the last few budgets, you've clearly demonstrated a very strong intent towards privatization and a commitment towards disinvestment. But in the last couple of years, despite fairly buoyant market conditions, those annual targets have never been met. And this time you scaled down your target to 65,000 crores. So my question is this, is to do with whatever factor, whether it's pushback from certain segments of the economy, unions, or lack of consensus within the cabinet or the government, are you showing less enthusiasm to the original idea of disinvestment? And why are these targets, despite favorable market conditions, never being met?
No, you're right in asking that question, but there is no lesser intent being shown. We've had our share of difficulty, haven't we? Because now I find, and I'm glad to find, people who talk about difficulties which government is facing, what we've not done in the last few years, and why didn't you do it, are speaking as though, and I'm saying as though they are oblivious of the pandemic. Could I have done with the same fervor any activity? You may then tell me, but you didn't do it in 19 as well. Yes, I agree. But we've gone through a stage where absolute critical essential things were being taken up in 2021 and 21-22 as well. And even amidst all this, we've managed the Air India. Amidst all this, we've still managed several more through the DPE, NINL also, and so on. So we've not given up on what has been cleared by the cabinet, broadly mentioned as a policy in the last budget, where I listed out the names of those which have to be going out for this investment. We shall continue with them. And then, yes, this question of why did you estimate higher earlier? Why have you underestimated yourself? One thing which I have very clearly sort of taken forward and insisted on is to be realistic. Your numbers have to be realistic. Your assessments will have to be realistic. Your work will have to be realistic. And if we had that focus through the COVID, one output of that is the way in which revenue has been really improving and buoyant. It is not, again, I'll remind you then, in 2019, one thing which I've heard repeatedly from everybody, and I agree with it, I have no complaints, tax terrorism. People are being harassed. I want to say today that because we have adapted technology and used faceless methods, it has its own small glitches. We were able to plug all the loopholes and improve on revenue generation. Other than the fact that it is buoyant because activity has been recovering, there are very many ways in which we are keeping a promise, but probably through ways which is not so obvious outside. And when the results come, I take an opportunity to say, hey, this is also because of this. So like that in disinvestment also, no hesitation, no taking a step backwards, we will go ahead and we'll continue to go ahead.
You know, in fact,
Like,
taking
Sorry.
borrowings which were off budget, making them more transparent, and being conservative in the estimates that you put up on tax collection or even on the GDP, where your view is more conservative than even the IMF, has been one of your big achievements in terms of becoming more and more transparent and conservative. Well, then you have a follow-up. Just go for it, and then we'll pass it on.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up, Mrs. Sitharaman, and I speak as a well-wisher on this issue of divestment. I want the government to achieve much more than it has achieved in the previous couple of years. And in that strain, I would like to ask you whether, something like a BPCL, which was supposed to have happened last year, do you think the government might be making it more difficult for itself by doing things like not raising the price of fuel? Because since November, the price of fuel has not gone up. Now, any bidder which is sitting out there in the world of petroleum sees all this and says, okay, then diesel is not, or fuel is not fully regulated, deregulated in India. Why am I going to buy this asset? Do you think these issues, kind of issues, may be coming in the way of successfully completing some of these big disinvestments?
You largely handle business journalism, don't you?
Of course.
Fuel
global
price.
business editor, that's his...
No, I'm purposely asking it. Fuel price. And you want me to look at it only from the prism of disinvestment? No way. It is important for us for two reasons. One, it is something which we almost like 95% of all that is consumed in India, we import. Second, that's actually, of course, when you look at the inflation basket, the component of fuel, lots of arguments can happen saying, is it really all that important or is it not? Aside from that, it certainly adds to the inflationary triggers. Now, even despite the pandemic, except for 1 or 2 months, we didn't breach the 6% barrier, just once or twice. We've been conscious that we have to be within the limit. And at one point in time, Prime Minister, just before Deepavali, brought down the price. And many states came down as well. And at a time where the futures of oil prices were not promising at all that it will come down. It was obvious, it'll remain there or it might go up. But even then we brought it down. So please, BPCL and this, I would not ever link. Although there is a reason to think that they're connected from the point of view of the valuation and everything else. But no, I'm more concerned about keeping the poor get their daily, wage, food be affordable, and energy is a very critical component in India because majority of the movement of the food happens largely by road, less by waterways. So, well, I have other considerations also.
And then the big gorilla in the room, which Mrs. Sitharaman didn't mention, is ELECTIONS, elections. Because, ma'am, for the last several weeks, fuel prices haven't gone up. And maybe it's just coincidence or chance, but we also have big elections in Uttar Pradesh and Punjab. Given that crude is at $90 a barrel plus, and given that Ukraine and Russia are now very stressed, and the impact, if there is a military escalation, that it could have on global crude oil prices, are people who are watching at this time to fear that once the elections in UP, Punjab, elsewhere are over on the 10th of March, there'll be a big spurt, or sharp spurt, immediate spurt in what we pay for petrol and diesel? And how do you see this link between elections and crude oil prices?
You are at your liberty to speculate on anything. You speculated that the budget is going to be for the elections which are happening. And the moment it didn't have anything in it, oh God, look at the shock. people are just, I mean, it's a boring budget. It had nothing in it, huh?
That's ducking a bouncer and just letting it go. Let the 10th of March come, then we'll deal with prices. Siddharth Zara.
Okay. One of the key things that the Modi government did, Madam Minister, in the first term was the cleanup. Is the big cleanup, the insolvency cleanup, the bad debt in the banks cleanup, the corporate balance sheet. And this is a major positive, which anyone would agree, including the worst critics, that you cleaned it up. In the last year or so, we have had a situation where public sector banks are much better placed due to your initiatives. Corporates are much better placed. There is so much liquidity infused by the RBI, yet private investment is lagging, and that would lead to job growth. We are seeing riots over relatively lower paid jobs. Why is the private sector not kicking in, and why is it only left to you and the government to do the heavy lifting?
I don't think the private sector is not coming in at all. They are coming in. And as I said earlier, they're coming in, maybe not as you and I would want in that kind of a scale and number. They're coming in. And there's also a reset happening in the economy. There are newer sunrise sector which are lots more prospective. And therefore, I think industry is also looking at very many things. Even the, let's say, shop floor management is all changing because of the way in which technology is being adapted. And skill also is playing a very big role in the way in which manufacturing or services are going to work out. So only today I was pleasantly surprised reading in one of the newspapers that particularly in service sector, the skill which people are looking for is very much available in India. And the youth that they are looking with a certain skill set is available. So services sector is benefiting out of it. So such changes are all happening. So I'm sure the private sectors coming in, as I said, is happening. It will ramp up even more. Omicron did bring in a dimension, but with it receding, I would think, and also with the way in which all state governments are handling the crisis, not going in for major statewide lockdowns and so on, I think things are going to change for the industry as well.
Talking about the youth, and for the youth, Madam Minister, they're only concerned with taxes. So I wanted to ask you whether in the next year, 2 years, you do see room for some relief on direct taxes, and whether it's a simplification of slabs, simplification of the overall structure, and of course, just a cut, of course.
Well, I thought we've already started doing that in the direct taxation. Not in the last budget, but the one before. We had already given a parallel track of simple and more attractive rates if you are able to give up on the exemptions. So drawing people out of that exemption-ridden system to a simpler system is already commenced. And eventually I would like to have a very simple, absolutely simple and low rate of taxation, particularly for the direct, and make it more attractive for compliance.
And how soon can we expect that?
Like many things, it'll go through its own course.
Saurabh Majumdar.
Madam Minister, you spoke about inflation, you spoke about, the challenges in terms of the pandemic. Now, I'll come back to a broader macro question. The economic survey talked about 8 to 8.5% GDP growth for FY23, based on a couple of assumptions. Now, one of them is, oil prices remaining at about 75, then also the whole thing of orderly withdrawal by other central banks from the liquidity which they've put in. Now, how realistic you think, given the complete uncertainty with the world with which in which we are living, how do you think, are you optimistic, and what do you think would be the key challenges in the next couple of years? And I bring your very important point also in this budget about sticking to the glide path. You've mentioned that's a very important tightrope walk which you have to do as finance minister, of balancing the growth imperative with the one of giving fiscal consolidation. What are the key challenges to that in your opinion?
it's not shifting the ground from where the challenges arise, but they are essentially two which are not so much within India. The global energy prices, the global energy prices, and also the rising prices of, I think, metals, ferrous, non-ferrous, and also the way in which global trade is turning out to be. So, also at a time when we are looking in India to have a transition from fossil fuel to renewable, non-fossil fuel based energy. Like many countries, I suppose, we also thought we can have natural gas as one of the transitional. Now, even that is imported for India, not substantial amount is available here. Now, the prices of all these, whether it is your crude, whether it is your, which is a fossil fuel, whether it is natural gas, all of them are going up. So that is one thing which certainly is a challenge for me to face, be prepared for, have a contingency. You're right, the conduct of other central banks, measures that are being taken by the US Fed, all also will be in one basket as a challenge. But I suppose, I think the institutional memory of the finance ministry and also for the Reserve Bank have learnt quite a lot since the last taper tantrum, 12-13, and I'm sure we'll not repeat those mistakes. So that's my second. And the third, two challenges are the fuel and also the transitional energy, looking at prices of metals, and this one where not a challenge but us being prepared. On that, we are closely watching the situation, and I suppose we've made, I would think, enough contingencies for meeting any such situation.
Let's spend a moment, Madam Finance Minister, on what is arguably one of your biggest challenges, creating jobs in this country. What we saw in Prayagraj in Uttar Pradesh and in Gaya in Bihar were arguably India's first employment to unemployment riots. Some 30,000 jobs, 1.25 crore people applying for them. You could get into an Ivy League institute easier than trying to get into a low-level job in the railways. If the percentage of Indians employed were to be equal to the percentage of people employed in the global workforce, on an average, India would need 600 million jobs. At this moment, we have about 400 million people in the working population, which means that 20 crore people who at this moment should have jobs but don't. That's alarming. But as the person who's really at the steering wheel of India's economy, how do you address the challenge of job creation? Does it give you sleepless nights? And what do you think you could do, or people sitting here could do, to try and expedite the creation of jobs? How do you see this?
It's on employment, I would think it's damn easy to ask a question. And it's a very big challenge for conveying what you're doing in the government. It's not just the government which is going to be able to provide jobs. It's also recognized that we need to have skills adequately imparted to our young so that they are able to find jobs out there, or also give them enough resources without having to chip in a security so that they can employ themselves. So that is where I think many of Prime Minister's programs are aiming at helping that young person to start his business by giving them credit without expecting security, where the government stands the security, and you do your business and come back to pay your, and in that there's quite a few interest subventions being given. So the spectrum of addressing job creation is across the board. Government to some extent, government facilitated somewhat, and for opportunities for self-employment, providing them connectivity to the world so they can sell their products, get them access to raw materials through transparent processes. So all this is happening, and we need to do a lot more. You may think I'm giving a very generic answer, but item by item, this is exactly what we are taking up and doing, so that when we give PLI, for instance, it's also looking at those sectors which are going to be labor intensive. Your mobile phone, many of us mock at us saying, it's just assembly, you're not, building phones in India. But we will. But at least immediately, the intensity with which investment can happen in that sector, find a market immediately, within the country, export, but look at the number who get employed in that. So all the 14 champion sectors are areas where we think there is going to be, and we've done enough homework to believe that they are job intensive sectors. These are the ways in which we are approaching it.
Udayan Mukherjee.
Mrs. Sitharaman, we were talking about divestment a while back, but a much bigger program and a more ambitious one in terms of numbers is the asset monetization program of the government that you have laid out. But while it's a 6 lakh crore program, we don't have a yearly target for it like this investment. Can you give us a sense of what you expect to achieve on the asset monetization front in, say, FY23, even a ballpark number? And what are the first 2 or 3 projects that you would like to take off the ground just to kick that asset monetization program off?
See, asset monetization is also going to come under the PM Gati Shakti framework. So, wherever there are lands which can be monetized, and the difficulty in putting a number in terms of valuation is because they are spread across the country. They are always not in the capital city. They are sometimes in remote parts, because the earlier priority was take an industry to the most underdeveloped area, remote area. It might help, and give them a lot of land, give them some money from the government, but that's where it was. So most of these lands which I can carve out for monetization are in different states, are in different parts of the states, all of which may not obtain the kind of value that we'll immediately imagine of a government piece of land. And one unit which sits in Delhi, the DIPAM, has to monetize that, has to monetize something else, somewhere east, somewhere west, and therefore it has its own difficulties. So number is impractical for me to give at one go. I can give piece by piece. And also looking at asset monetization being a part of Gati Shakti is only going to help us to optimally utilize it for something else which would otherwise go searching for land in the neighborhood, can also be helped in providing it for them. Some of the states have come forward saying we wouldn't mind taking it because it might help us in starting a new program for ourselves. So it is a very dynamic process. Engagement is happening with the states, and also very clearly some of the private sector have approached saying, hey, you've listed this, would you tell us if we can bid for it? So it's happening from both sides. So it will take a bit of while for me to give you some kind of a number, but the process is on.
Siddharth Rabi.
One very quick point, ma'am. We were just talking about formal jobs, and all of us recall the target 6 million number that you mentioned in your speech. The point really is that as far as the informal job creation scheme called NREGA, a lot of economists are saying you are under allocating for it next year, and that the tap of social expenditure is perhaps being prematurely shut down or squeezed. Let me correct myself.
Again, I don't know who are these people who are looking at the numbers. If I've given something in the BE, you compare with it what I'm saying in the current BE. Not peg today's BE with yesterday's RE. I have not reduced my BE allocation for Manrega. In fact, let me say, 2020-21, from the initial BE of 64, we crossed 1 lakh and reached 1,11,000 crores. It's a demand-driven program. As and when the demand arises, we are going to give it. And how do we give it? Because each time we go through the supplementary demand for grants in the parliament and apportion that money, additional money each time. So a government which is looking at reviving the economy in ever so many ways and also putting big money into capital expenditure is not going to grudge these sort of things. But only we need to have a fair looking at the figure rather than picking it up from, out of context. And
So we'll take some questions from those in the audience. Mr. Puneet Chattal at Indian Hotels, can we have a mic sent across to him, please, and we can get him? The services sector badly impacted by the pandemic. Mr. Chattal, go for it.
Thank you, Rahul. Honorable Finance Minister, thank you for the comments on hospitality. Thank you for the extension of ECLGS to 50,000 crores. One of the things that comes to my mind is that given the focus the government has had on infra, what is so difficult in extending hospitality sector the infra status? Number two is why can we not have it included after 75 years of independence in the concurrent list of constitution? Number three, to quote and unquote you in one of the forums, where you use the word Gamanzo Yui, the sector that has been patient, resilient, and perseverant can help. Just now on the question before that, on employment, because this is going to take off again in a very big way. And one of the ways to solve the challenge of employment is through this sector, because in both the formal and informal employment, this sector globally has played a very important role and will continue to do so also in this country. So I don't have a question, my only request is over the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, as things change and evolve, I think you have other levers besides the budget to be used to support this sector. Thank you.
We'll get the next question from Mr. Arun Puri, the Chairman and Editor-in-Chief of the India Today Group. Mr. Puri.
Madam Minister, excuse me for asking a what-if question. What if you had got the full amount of money from your disinvestment, which is I think 1,75,000 crores? What would you have done with it in this budget?
it would have been part of my 7.5.
So it has gone to infra,
Of course.
not to
Priority
any,
now
no any
is-
revenue expenditure.
No, priority now is capital expenditure because that has a greater multiplier.
So, I mean, you've been criticized for not helping the ones who are vulnerable and giving them relief. So I would have thought that you would have put some of that into revenue expenditure.
Well, you asked a what if. I'm telling a what
Okay, sir.
I can do.
Okay.
And that is why I said that. But it's also not true that we are not giving anything to the suffering. We can give a lot more. It's a different story. 19 full months, free food grain has been given by this government. It's not because we don't, it's not because we are insensitive to those who are suffering. EPFO has been paid by the government, all 24%, both employer and employees. The emergency credit guarantee, you would say, is definitely a credit. It's only a loan, but it is backed by government assets. You've not given an extra property for it. As a result of which State Bank of India study itself said 1.5 crore jobs have been retained. They would have been thrown out of the jobs otherwise. So there are ways in which we are coming up with help for those who need it. It may be insufficient. It may be insufficient. But we will try to do more. But we've chosen the capital expenditure route because we think the multiplier is better. And that, again, is not going to remain in terms of cement and steel. It's also going to create jobs in situ wherever these projects are being undertaken.
Raj Chingappa, Editorial Director, Publishing of India Today.
Madam Finance Minister, I just want to continue with what Arun had asked, and also Rahul had mentioned. The fact that while a lot of these infrastructure projects would take time, there's a gestation period, you have to buy land, you have to get things going, and the jobs may not come quickly enough to meet the need. Why didn't you all think there was speculation, rumor that there was going to be a form of an urban Manrega? was there a serious thought about it? And why didn't it figure in the budget?
Well, there are serious thoughts given for several proposals and suggestions which come. It's also because the government needs a formulation with which you can execute it. Manrega is there, and it has also been criticized by the CAG during pre-2014 era. And we've corrected those based on the CAG's comments, and we are effecting it without any kind of pilferage. One. And second, spending in infra gives a misleading indication, I think, that till that project, assume I'm building a dam, assume I'm building a flyover in a city, till the flyover completes or the project gets completed and the flyover is inaugurated, it does not create any effect on the economy, seems to be the assumption. That's not true at all. Till the flyover is inaugurated, it gets built, people work on it. People also work in those cement factories, in those steel factories, in those brick factories, in those cable factories. People work there also. They are all procured. And the work happens at the site. So till that time, actually, and not certainly after the completion of the project, it creates employment, direct and indirect. Post that, it helps people to go faster to the place where they are employed in. If you take the example of a flyover in the heart of a city. So, end of the project is the outcome, but the process, money moves from my hand to the fellow who's supplying cement, for the fellow who brings the contract workers, for the fellow who brings the cable, and the fellows who are laying it all. So, it does create immediate jobs.
No, I was only mentioning that not at the fag end of a project or anything like that. I was just saying that any project in this country to take off in an infra project, whether it's land acquisition, there is a time lag. There is definitely that. And in this time lag of, say, 1 or 2 years, what is the kind of circle you would provide those who really need the jobs?
Well, I think the projects which are in the pipeline have already been cleared and work has happened. In fact, the last 2 years, if you would see the number of projects which have got completed. For that matter, if I have to take this Swami, the single window that we opened up for completing incomplete projects for housing, money went in, it created jobs. The project got completed. Middle class households got the key to their apartments. Happened all within the 2 years. That was early 2020 that I had opened up that project. And by now, home buyers have got their flats, work has been happening in these sites, projects have been completed. It didn't wait for too long.
We're coming to the end of this session. We have time only for very quick last comments. Abha?
I have a question from the audience. Arijit has sent a question. FIs have been selling for the past month, and today DIIs have sold more than 1,000 crores. Is this then the right time to plan the LIC IPO? It's from the audience.
Is it the right time for?
The LIC IPO.
LIC IPO is all planned. It's getting executed. It is in the execution stage. Execution also will be completed sooner.
Do you worry about, nobody can time the market, but is that a factor that weighs in your head? Because foreign portfolio investment is negative for the last several months. People would have said if you'd come in soon after March 2020, and at the time when all these IPOs were coming, LIC would have got Blockbuster opening and even, for example, BPCL. Now when the mood isn't as bullish, the trend line seems rather neutral. Coming in at this time may not generate the same level of valuation that you would have got otherwise. Is that something that is of concern to you in your decision-making matrix?
No, it doesn't worry me in that sense. We will need the time that I need to have the work prepared. Just because the rates outside are so good, I have to rush today, I really can't. I need to cook it up in the sense of compliance, meeting with the required due diligences, and also getting all the file and paperwork. It's government which is going out there. So everything has to be proper. So when I'm ready, I'll just see what has got to be done at that time.
One very quick follow-up, ma'am. As growth comes back and picks up pace and continues, will inflation also follow a similar trajectory, and does that worry you?
See, the inflation which is triggered off because of factors outside of India, you know the arguments. But within the country, the cycle of crops, the perishable crops particularly, which affect the poor and their consumption, the cycle because you have a crop which can't last for long, but between the crops there's always the shortage, and probably also because we don't produce enough of certain crops which are also part of our essentials, for which I need to import. I have to plan well in advance for its import and so on. So inflation, I look at those things where I can play a role and help, and those for which where external factors play up, how I can prepare myself for the contingency. So it is it's a layered matter.
Last question from Saurabh Majumdar.
Madam Minister, during the pandemic, the first year, the second year when the waves were, we didn't know much about it. The government and the Reserve Bank actually, did a lot of work together in tandem. You did what you could, the Reserve Bank did what they could, and the old argument of the problems between the government and the Reserve Bank seem to be completely forgotten and a thing of the past. As you look at fresh challenges, like you just spoke about inflation, RBI's big concern is inflation. Now, how do you then sort of work together in tandem when the concerns from RBI side are also on inflation and therefore on interest rates? So how do you look at that?
Well, that is because it's possible to have that challenge addressed when the two of us are in constant consultation mode. And I think, to be fair to the RBI, they have been continuously engaging with us. And we've been happy to take their inputs and also giving what we can share with them. That process will continue, and that, I think, is the biggest assurance for all of us, in that between the RBI and the Ministry of Finance, there's a great synchrony.
Ma'am, just one forward-looking statement. India is one of the fastest-growing economies in the world right now. All eyes are on India. We have so much, investment that's coming into India. We've seen the way markets have been on fire. Do you feel that we're on track to be a $5 trillion economy by 2025?
Well, all efforts are towards that. And if we continue at this kind of a pace and with more involvement of the private sector, I can't see why not.
The last question will be from Kali Puri, our Vice Chairperson. Kali.
Ma'am, how did you fend off the pressure to have an election budget? I mean, basically, the 5 states going in for elections is considered the semi-final for 2024. Did you have pressure on you to give a more populist budget, and how did you fend it off?
There wasn't any pressure. There wasn't any pressure at all. I've had consultation from every sector and with the party and within the government. I had no pressure at all. And I'm deliberately repeating this line, looking into your eye. I've had no pressure at all.
Last question, Udayan, very quickly.
Well, since I've been accused of being only a business journalist, let me ask her a question which is in the cusp of politics and business. Mrs. Sitharaman, this is election season. There are many state elections, and leading up to the big one in 2024. You are a finance minister, but you're also a politician. In your shoes, what do you worry about more? Is it inflation or is it unemployment? Because both these could be very strong challenges for an incumbent government. As you get into the home stretch over the next 18-24 months, of these two, what do you think is the bigger headwind potentially for your party?
I'll be more focused on the economic revival. That's the focus I will have, and I will keep doing that.
Madam Finance Minister, I'm not certain about you, but I loved this session. It was a lot of fun. Far more engaging than with no disrespect to any of our friends in any of the industry chambers, far more incisive, sharp questions and fantastic answers as well. So thank you so much for joining us here at the India Today, Business Today Budget Roundtable to be able to...
You've been 5 and 6 and 7 brains all together.
which is why
I
we
want
loved
to
it.
compare it with one
And
brain
I
which
think you
you
dealt with them wonderfully.
No.
You dealt with them wonderfully. A round of applause.
So, and to come here and answer all these questions with aplomb, as you said, asking some of these questions is easier than having answers which leave tangible results. I remember interviewing you right after you became finance minister, and in these 4 budgets that you've presented, you've grown in confidence, your composure, your ability to handle tricky questions, and letting the odd bouncer go over your head without getting caught out. Thank you so much, Madam Finance Minister,
Thank
for
you.
being
Thank
here
you.
at the India Today Business Today Budget Roundtable. Deeply appreciate your time. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.